I'm super grateful to be here. When I begin a painting, I like to think that the goal is to do more than create a painting. It's an exercise in radical imagination. No, scratch that. It's a seed of radical imagination. If this were actually a painting, I would cross that out and cover it with that new word. And there's actually a word for that called palimpsest. I heard someone use it to describe my work, bold portraits coupled with palimpsest backgrounds. I thought it was a diss, so I looked it up, and now it's my new favorite word. Something that has been layered or covered repeatedly while still retaining hints of its earlier forms. My life is in that word. For example, normally when I tell my story, I say that my journey to becoming an artist was a long, meandering one because I didn't have access to seeing Black artists, so therefore I didn't see being an artist as a real thing. But we're going to cross that out and cover it with a new idea because that one is based on a very narrow definition of what an artist is. I believe the role of an artist is to imagine alternatives to the present. With that definition in mind, I would argue that each of you in this room are artists. And with that definition in mind, I realized that the first artist I met was my grandfather. He organized people in his New Orleans community around shared goals. And in the 70s, he even passed for white while campaigning with a man who wanted to become the first Black mayor of New Orleans, entering into white-only meetings to report back to the campaign. So I imagine my grandfather, he saw politics as a way to harvest his imagination for an alternative to the present. I can see him doodling on his hands, as he told me he was doing, in places he didn't belong, just as I was doodling on walls in places I didn't belong. About a decade ago, myself and a few dozen artists found ourselves making merry amongst the rubble of a Katrina-damaged housing project in the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. We called that art experiment Project B. When the authorities made a palimpsest of this space by covering the art, we organized even more artists in a more expansive community art project called Exhibit B. Artists stretching their imagination about what could be built on top of the ashes of a nightmare. Then in 2016, in an attempt to make my first solo show as an artist, I took over this 32,000 square foot warehouse. It was only supposed to last for 6 months, and now 8 years later, Studio B has welcomed hundreds and thousands of guests, community artists, students, with this idea of what's possible with programming, events, etc. What's grown from this space is my organization, my nonprofit, Eternal Seeds. We work with emerging artists, equipping them with the tools they need to become our most revolutionary leaders by investing in their ability to imagine alternatives to the present. But what if we get covered again? The way this portrait is typically painted, artists are welcomed into spaces with little value, use their alchemy to create value, and then are removed because of said value. Well, we're going to cover up that idea. A few months ago, Eternal Seeds purchased that warehouse. I believe ownership is one of the most powerful acts of liberation. The only people who will be covering up our work now is us, creating a living museum and community space that surpasses our wildest dream. We want to be an example of what happens when artists are allowed to paint beyond the borders of a canvas. Outside the borders of a canvas is a lot of unknown, mystery, and possibilities. And I believe that once you enter into the darkness of the unknown, you either find something solid to stand on, or you'll be taught how to fly. That's what my grandfather did. He even ran for office himself a few times. He never fully made it inside the halls of power. He did help elect the first Black mayor of New Orleans, though. And, yeah, give it up for that. And when I get back home to New Orleans, I will begin my latest mural. It's a portrait of my grandfather on a wall that towers next to City Hall. It's a future, yes. It's a future he probably didn't imagine, but it's also one that he made. Thank you so much.